KC Joyner wrote for ESPN, the magazine, in his Patriots-Eagles preview about the different grades he gives for both of these teams. We'll take a look at them right now with KC Joyner, ESPN.com, NFL Insider on the Sports Bash, and he, like all guests, appears via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. KC, welcome back. How are you, pal?
Hey, doing great. Driving another car, so if you hear a little noise in the background, just beware.
All right. Well, we know that it's a busy time for everybody right now, getting ready for the Super Bowl here. New England against Philadelphia. You broke this down for ESPN, the magazine, in the preview, which I actually, just got. I guess I don't know if this is this the Super Bowl preview edition that I just got handed to me here. I'll have to thumb back through that. But take a look at New England. Let's start with them. It's everybody looks at Brady. But what else is that offense? When you look at them running the ball, the ability to protect Brady, the offensive line, his weapons, give us a little insight on the team other than Brady on offense.
For this article, I used a system that I've been using all season long to grade offensive lines. Actually, I call them offensive blocking walls because it grades all blockers, fullbacks, tight ends, even receivers when they block. And it took a look at all the teams, and it takes a number of advanced blocking metrics and then converts them into an A to F grade so it's easy to understand. New England was one of only 3 teams to get an A grade in both run and pass blocking this year. They were 5th in the league in a metric I have called good blocking rate that measures how often an offense gets ball carriers good run blocking. They were 7th in the pass protection rate. They were good in time in pocket. They were good in sack rate. They were good in a number of other areas. So that offensive line, a couple years ago, it was a weakness. They brought Dante Scarnecchia back. He's been one of the greatest offensive line coaches in the history of the league, and it has shown this season because that offense can do everything they can do because how good the offensive line is blocking.
Do they have a particular or a weakness on that offensive line where you think Philadelphia, much like the last couple of weeks, they've exploited Minnesota and Atlanta in a weak spot?
I don't know that they've been very consistent in run blocking, so I think they don't necessarily, if I'm looking at run blocking, though, they don't rate as well in good blocking yards per attempt, which means when you're getting good blocking, how many yards you're gaining. They're above average, but they're not great in that, which means you don't have to necessarily worry about them getting breakaway runs, and so they're going to be more consistent in their blocks than they are like some teams, like the Cowboys. The Cowboys are less consistent in their run blocking, but when they block well, they give really big holes that you could drive a truck through. That's not what the Patriots do. The Patriots are just very consistent, so you don't have to worry necessarily about them getting breakaway runs.
KC Joyner is with us. The Philadelphia defensive front 7. By the way, you ranked or graded the New England offensive line run blocking A-, pass blocking A-, and overall A-. So this line, would you say the New England line is better than Minnesota or Atlanta?
By far better than Minnesota or Atlanta. In fact, Minnesota had, out of the 8 teams, I believe their offensive line ranked 7th in I did a rankings before the divisional playoff round. I ranked all the 8 teams. They were 7th among that. And Atlanta was, I believe it was 4th. They got a 1 A grade and 1 B grade. So they were close. But this line is one of the most consistent. In fact, I would call it the most consistent offensive line in the league. There are offensive lines, a couple offensive lines that might get better upside grades, but they would be the most consistent.
Philadelphia's defensive front 7. This is where a lot of people think, specifically the front 4, if you want to add in the reserves and what they do with Long and Curry and Barnett and Brandon Graham. Is this a spot that you like?
Yeah, I do. Philadelphia's front 7, or Philadelphia's run defense is the best in the NFL on that good blocking rate metric. They only allowed a 32.9% good blocking rate, which is incredible because 41 is the league average, and if you get close, you're just barely above 30. I mean, that means it's 7 out of 10 runs. And good blocking plays will generally average about 8 yards per carry. Bad blocking plays are going to average maybe 1 2 if you're lucky. So on 70% of the runs against Philadelphia, basically speaking, you're giving the other team's getting bad run blocking, and they're not going to get any big gains. So that's a big plus for them, and it's why I believe I had them rated as an A in their front 7 run defense.
Yeah, you do, and also the pass rush grade is a B, and the overall front 7's a B. What about the Eagles linebackers? Because that's going to be an area that I find intriguing because the Patriots like to throw the ball out of the backfield a lot.
They do, and the thing I worry about with the linebackers is Philadelphia. When their downside in their run defense is they do a fantastic job in good blocking yards per attempt, But when you do get good block or in good blocking rate, but when you do get good blocking against them and you gaining 9 yards per attempt, they're one of the worst teams at good blocking yards per attempt. So this is not a team that does a good job of holding long games down. So I think the Patriots, even though they don't generally tend to get a lot of long gainers, they could get more long gainers, and that's going to make the linebackers have to consider make sure that they're going to have to look out for that. So I think the Eagles, as great as they are with disrupting the rushing game, I almost would like to see them coach their linebackers to say, you need to hold your gaps a little bit more. You need to make sure that you don't allow the big gainers. But again, if you're doing that, are you allowing things in the passing game? So it's a two-edged sword for Philadelphia.
Yeah. And one thing, what do you make of the backs for New England? I mean, the last couple of weeks, you had McKinnon catch 11 balls out of the backfield, but Murray didn't do much on the ground. Atlanta was virtually shut down running the ball. What about the plethora of backs and the different things they do for New England?
It's tough because they've got ideas of what they want to do with each one of their backs. I mean, they've got ideas for Lewis, for White, for Burkhead. They've got a number of different things they want to do. If I'm Philadelphia, again, if all those backs are pass-catching backs, and as you mentioned, you're almost more worried about their pass-catching ability than you are their rushing ability. So that's really where they're at. They don't have a breakaway runner, so I'm caught in between where I want to stop, get them to stop the long gainers, but I also want to stop the pass catch. When you've got those backs like that, I really want to make sure I don't let them get into those sorts of situations. And I really want to make sure I'm looking up for things like Texas routes where they run, say a tight end runs upfield and the running back runs a little angle route behind him and things. I'm looking for things like that because I think that New England's going to say, Philadelphia's linebackers are so aggressive, I can get them to bite on things of that nature. So if I'm them, everything is about trying to limit the big plays, turning small plays into big ones.
Gronkowski, we anticipate he would play, but if you're Philadelphia, is that a Jenkins matchup? Is that do you go with a Bradham or a Michael Kendrick? So what's the best way in studying some of these teams, how they go about, trying to slow down Gronk anyway? What personnel on Philly is the matchup there?
That's tough because most teams have had the most success against New England with Gronkowski if you play him with the cornerback. If you say we're going to put a cornerback on him, but you need a big physical cornerback, and I don't know that I trust any of the Eagles' cornerbacks enough. And plus, I actually think the safeties are better in man-to-man coverage in some ways than the cornerbacks are. So if I'm them, I don't want to leave a linebacker or even a linebacker on him. I think he's going to just torch this defense. I'd be rotating safeties on him. A lot of what I try and do though, they go vertical with him. So they like to go downfield a lot. So if I'm them, I don't, because you can either play a defense, if you're double covering somebody, you're usually going to either stop high-low routes or you're going to stop inside-out read. You're going to stop one of the two. If I'm them, I just stop the high-low routes and say, I'm going to bracket you high and low. If you go to the outside and you can catch things, you can go to the outside and catch things. I'm going to try and match up with you personal-wise to keep you from doing that. But I just don't want Gronk to hit the vertical passes. I want them going somewhere else.
Hey, KC, just to give our listeners maybe a little more insight on the Patriots' offensive line, you graded them as an A across the board. Are they better than the Eagles' offensive line as a point of reference?
Yeah, they're more consistent. The run blocking, I think Philadelphia's run blocking, I mentioned that New England tends to coach consistency over everything else. They're not looking – they'd like to make big holes in the defense, but they're really – more worried about consistency, and they want to have consistent gains to keep their drives more. Whereas Philadelphia, they want consistency, but I think they want their offensive linemen to make big gaps to where you can get breakaway guys. Because like Blunt and Ajayi both, if you look at their history and my good blocking yards per attempt metrics, there are only a handful of backs who can reach a double-digit yards per attempt total there in that category over the course of full volume of carries, say 100 or more carries in the season. Two of the backs have done that in the past. So they tend to say we want to get big holes in the defense so we can get our gains. So Philadelphia is more worried about getting big holes than they are about consistency. So I think that's the difference between those two lines.
And by the way, you gave the Eagles a B+ in blocking, a C in pass blocking, and an overall grade of B-. So how is New England's pass rush, Casey?
New England's pass rush over the course of the season, they graded it as a C. The problem for Philadelphia is from weeks 11 through 17, New England ranked 5th in pass pressure rate. So they really improved their pass rush over the second half of the season. The first half of the season, they couldn't get their pass rush going. In fact, they allowed 6 straight games of 300 or more yards. I guess an NFL record to start the season. So they really weren't doing well. But over the second half of the season, they figured out how to get a pass rush, and it really helped to shore up that part of the defense. So if I'm Philadelphia, I don't know that I want to trust the pass blocking because Philadelphia's pass blocking, like I said, they graded to see, and their pass pressure rate metrics have been good but not great this season. I don't know that I want Foles to test that very often. Maybe test it on some vertical passes, throw like 8 vertical passes like he's done each of the past 2 games, take some shots downfield, but for the most part, I want to lean on the running game and see if I can win that way.
KC Joyner with us as we peel away the layers and analyze Eagles and Patriots. So, KC, how do you account for James Harrison and the role that he's had since he's come over? Is he somebody that the Eagles should be worried about?
He should. My youngest son is so mad. He's a Steelers fan. He hates the fact that he's not. So he gets so mad whenever he sees anything about James Harrison. I kind of go to him. I'm like, look, Harrison got a sack and things. They should worry about him because he's shown in the playoffs that he can still generate some pass rush. And you talk about a team that from weeks 11 through 17 ranked 5th in pass pressure rate, and now you add this guy who is capable of being a spot pass rusher that you can, because Bill Walsh used to say the most important thing for an NFL team is to generate a pass rush in the 4th quarter. They could save Harrison and say, look, we don't need you to rush the first 3 quarters. Fine, you just go rush in the 4th quarter like he's been doing, and he can still get in there. So it is a concern because if you take the number 5 team of the last half of the season and now you're adding a guy who can make a 4th quarter impact, it can be a very dangerous thing for Philadelphia.
Casey, before we get too far away from like the Eagles offensive line versus the Patriots pass rush and all that stuff, Josh, Mike, and I all were talking about the teams in the past, the Eagles team that went 7-9, for example, and how valuable Lane Johnson is to the Eagles offensive line, and that crazy stat of what their record is when he's in the lineup versus when he's not in the lineup. Is he their MVP on the offensive line, I guess, of the guys that are there right now?
Yeah, I'd have to say, because he's, again, you talk about wanting to make those big holes in the defense, because the Eagles don't just want, like, they want consistency. That's not what they coach for. They coach to get the big runs, and he's a guy who pancake blocks as good as anyone in the league. So I would say he probably is, because he's probably the most consistent. And again, if you want to get big road grader lanes through the defense, he's the guy who's going to do it for you.
We're talking with KC Joyner here on the Sports Bash. Says, when you look at games, the Eagles have won the last couple of weeks. They've won in the trenches. Their defensive line has out-muscled Minnesota and Atlanta, and their offensive line has done a great job protecting Folds. Essentially here, is it the same story? The team that wins in the trenches wins the Super Bowl?
I think so. And the Eagles, the one place where there could be a big mismatch, and this is where Philadelphia gets the best chance of winning the game, is New England's front 7 against the run. They graded that as an F. I mean, an F for anything on New England that to be anything below a C you'd think would be incredible. But they were 30th in the league in good blocking rate allowed. They only 6 teams allowed more games of 100 or more rushing yards during the season. I mean, this is a team that does not do that well against the run. And frankly, they need to they can't just count on the front 7 talent-wise to win point of attack battles. They really haven't gotten that much better as the season's progressed. They have to bring safeties up. So if I'm Philadelphia, I'm saying I want to take my offensive line that can create big gaps in your defense. I want to run consistently at you guys to just pound the ball here and then have Foles do counterpunching. The New England doesn't want Philadelphia to get in the situation where they can keep leaning on the ground game. If New England can get Philadelphia to throw the ball, it's going to be a huge edge. But if they can't get Philadelphia to stop leaning on the ground game, if I'm Philadelphia, I'm just doing that left and right all game long. I want to run the ball 40 times. Yeah,
LaGarrette, Blunt, Jay Ajayi, obviously Blunt with New England last year. Ajayi knows the Patriots pretty well. We'll see how those 2 guys fare. And then you throw Clement in there. The Eagles have their stable of 3 guys. And then, of course, the wide receiver, Zach Ertz, is another interesting guy. I'm interested to see how Ertz factors in this game, because when you read off the depth chart for New England, Casey, there's not that front 7 name. There's not a Richard Seymour on this team.
No, there's not. And again, we talked before the Minnesota game about going to tight ends and rotating at tight ends and using and getting passes there. I want to lean heavily on the tight end for passes too. And again, they want to choose their spots going vertical. If I'm Philadelphia, I can't let the game go by without at least trying a big vertical pass. But they need to do it in the way that they did it against Minnesota. Although, again, Minnesota's pass rush is nowhere near as good as New England's. Make New England worry about that running game, and you just got to be able to go vertical against them, because if you can do that, if you can get the ground game going and go vertical over the top, and I think you can create situations where you can. I don't think New England usually likes to get in the shootout games. I don't know that this is the sort of game, even if they do get in a shootout, that if they can't get Philadelphia out of the ground game mode, I don't know that it's necessarily good for them. So if I'm Philadelphia, I want to get out to a lead and see if I can make Brady one-dimensional.
How do you factor in, KC, the special teams? That's an area that I tend to gravitate toward, the kicking game, or that's what Tom Osborne used to call it, offense, defense, and the kicking game. The Eagles have had some issues in the past couple of weeks, but then I see things like, weird, obscure stats about, like, the Patriots long snapper and things like that. I mean, you factor the special teams in?
I do. ESPN Stats and Information, our department has a metric called Special Teams Expected Points Added. Special teams expected points added, in a nutshell, it grades special teams performance on a scoreboard basis, basically saying how many points can you expect the special teams to contribute to a team in the game. Philadelphia this season, during regular season, had like 17.5 points in special teams expected points added. It was the 8th best total in the league. It means you got about a point a game from them during the regular season. New England got 43.5 points during the season, like 2.5 points per game, almost 3 points per game from their special teams. And during the playoffs, New England's at just over. It was like 0.8 points through these two games, so not quite as good as they were during the regular season. But Philadelphia's at minus 6.2 points in the playoffs. So Philadelphia could lose if the pace continues. What you saw during the regular season and during the playoffs, they could lose as many as 3 to 5, maybe even 6 points in the special teams if they can't step the special teams back up. So they really need to make sure they get that shored up.
We got plenty more next week on the Sports Bash, breaking this game down. Just a little snippet there. And by the way, yes, this is the new ESPN, the magazine, and there is KC Joyner's article, or part of the article that many of these ESPN writers all broke down this game. KC did it from the offensive line perspective. I will not say KC's call yet because I will give you a chance to rethink that for your next episode of the Sports Bash.
I may rethink that. By the way, we wrote that in advance of the article. Whether they had me do it, because of deadlines and things, I had to write that out. So we literally were posting that into doing the final post on it the night of the conference championship games. I may rethink my pick between now and the Super Bowl, though, because it's because the way I'm seeing on tape and things, I like the Eagles' chances probably more than I did when I wrote that.
All right, we got plenty more next week on the show, and we will have Casey back with some thoughts on the other matchups. Today we really focused on the offensive line matchups, but I want to get into the skill position players and, of course, that Eagle defense, which has really got them here next week right here on the Sports Bash. All right, pal, enjoy the rest of the weekend. Andre the Giant, HBO.
Cannot wait. Looks like an awesome, awesome show, and nobody will really be able to do his life story credit. And if they can do anywhere near close to what it looks like they're going to be able to do with it, man, that is going to be compelling viewing.
Who wins the Rumble?
I really don't know, to be honest with you. I can think of 3 or 4 people I think could win. Who do you got?
I would probably say I think I'm leaning towards Nakamura.
Yeah, I could see that. I could absolutely see that. It's one of those things, though, where it's good for them that they don't have anybody where it's like it's a given who's going to win. A lot of times you can know in advance. I don't think with this Rumble, I think they can go in 3 or 4 different directions. That kind of makes it more compelling.
Will we see Daniel Bryan?
I don't think so, but let's hope so.
If he's in, he wins. I was at the Rumble in 15 when they booed Reigns out of the joint.
If he's in and they don't win, the place will riot.
Yeah. So here's a question for you. You're a big WWE guy. You write with the ESPN WWE. You do some coverage there. The Rumble is in Philly. Now, I have tickets to NXT, Raw, and SmackDown. I do not have Rumble tickets, but I do have tickets for the Jim Ross show on Sunday. I'm working on the Rumble tickets, by the way. But the Eagles are in the Super Bowl. So if you had a lump sum of money to go to all 4 events or the Super Bowl, which one are you picking? If you're an Eagles fan.
If I could take my family, I'd go to the Super Bowl because I always promised my family I would. If I went to the Super Bowl, I could take them. So if I could take the family to the Super Bowl, I'd go there. But if it's just me, because I promised my family I'd go with them to the Super Bowl, I would go to the WWE events if that were the case.
Because the Rumble is announced way in advance, so people put out a lump sum of money way in advance for that, and now I've been hit with a divisional game, a championship game, and then a Super Bowl package. It's been a lot of money people have been going in their pockets for recently. But, all right, we got plenty more coverage next week with Casey here on the Sports Bash. All right, pal. And by the way, KC Joyner is up for your favorite NFL guest. at the Sports Bash Awards. Vote now at 973ESPN.com. Actually, the voting is up. We're going to announce those winners coming up in about 6 minutes from now, so we'll see if Casey is your favorite. And you're up against some tough competition. Brian Baldinger, Sal Paolantonio, Willie McGinnis. Tough group of guys there, but you're faring very well the last time I checked.
I'm glad to hear that, and Sal Powell is a legend, so if I took second to him, I would totally understand. He's a great guy.
All right, Casey, take care.
Appreciate it.